This is Mr. Smart. Mr. Smart's a third grade teacher. He's about to teach multi-digit subtraction. Now, I know we're all used to the drop down, bring over, and that kind of thing. And he doesn't want to do that. He has been working on a vertical alignment team in his district so that he wants to make sure if he teaches it correctly his way, it will lead to future success for students. In other words, he doesn't want what's called a terminal skill. He wants to prepare them for success. So to do that, he's not going to abstractly to say, here's how I teach it. No, he's going to go through an example. And he's going to take an example from his experience of where his students struggled. And he's going to look at the steps that he used to solve that problem. So here's one of his examples here that he practiced on. 325 minus 148. But he's not going to look at it just like that. He wants to have students be able to decompose those numbers. So he wants them to expand it. 300s plus 2 10s plus 5 1s minus 100 minus 4 10s minus 8 1s. Now that he set this up, he wants to make sure he can break that down and make sure that although he's okay with the negative understandings, because that's what they'll be in the future, he worries that some of his students aren't prepared properly for that. So he needs to teach them some regrouping strategies. He knows that he can maintain the 300 if he puts 200 here and another 100 in the tens column. That makes 12 tens. But that 5 minus 8, he worries is going to confuse them. So he takes out of that 12 tens, one of the tens here, makes it 11 tens and another 10 over here. That's that regrouping. That's what shows up here. Then he wanted some vertical subtraction. It's really subtraction by place value, just appears vertical. But what is 200 minus 100? It's 100. What's 11 tens minus 4 tens? That's 7 tens. What's 15 ones minus 8 ones? That's 7 ones. Then he wants you to figure out the difference or addition, right? And then he's going to total the answer. So this is the steps that he come up. These steps is what he's going to come up with. So when you're coming up with yours in the near future, think about the steps that you will take. But these are his 5 steps. Why is that important? Well, because he's going to set up a student needs chart. What he's going to do is he's going to be looking at what are the most difficult things that students have to do within this approach. And then based on what are some of the students' needs. Now, it's not a bad thing to have needs. And I know that we all get nervous about talking about student needs, but and I understand the deficit model, but it's important to know where students' strengths and weaknesses are and what we can do to tackle that. Yes, if we had the time, it'd be great to teach students based on those needs, but some of those needs will need to be shored up so they can have future success. These are the skills that he came up with, and they match his task analysis. Expanded notation, right? The decomposition, regrouping, subtraction, and vertical alignment. These are 4 of the main concerns he has thought about for his students based on some of their previous work. So he analyzes that previous work, maybe an error pattern analysis, working with other teachers, maybe the interventionist, and he knows, okay, which of my students will trip over this lesson before I even teach it. He's then going to try to figure out what are some of the accommodations, modifications, or specialized instruction that I can give to them to support them. All right, so let's focus here. Looking at those 4 skills, here's what he thinks about for his students in the analysis. 2 students lack place value understanding. 1 student forgets to regroup. 2 students are weaker at single digit subtraction. In other words, they're not yet proficient. And 2 students misalign or lose track of their subtraction per place value. Okay, knowing that, let's go back into that chart. All right, 4 areas. Knowing this, how did those align with the needs in that chart? Well, he knows now with expanded notation, 2 students are not strategic. 1 student forgets to regroup or doesn't understand negatives, so he wouldn't even know to regroup, right? 2 minus 4 is the same as 4 minus 2. That's actually a first grade misunderstanding of that number line approach, right? And not number array approach, number line approach. He then is going to look at single digit subtraction, right? Where he said 1 student's inconsistent, 1's just been inaccurate, consistently inaccurate. And then the vertical alignment, 2 students are misaligning their numbers. So what's he going to do about that for those students? Well, here's the supports he's going to provide. Those accommodations, modifications, or specially designed instruction. He's going to look at scaffolding place value before the lesson. I noted that in a color coding system here. That's independent. I want my students to be as independent as possible. For the regrouping, the one student who is inconsistent here is worried that that's a pretty big deficit for this student still. So he's going to verbally cue him, right? You have 2 and you're taking 4 away. You don't know how to do that yet. So what are we going to do? So he wants to verbally cue. He still wants, student will be dependent on him, but he needs to support the student. With single digit subtraction, he's going to monitor one and provide a calculator for the other. And yes, the calculator is very dependent on something else. So he's going to hope that that student or that student's maybe already in intervention. Then the vertical alignment. He's going to use graph paper to help with that expanded notation so that they can keep track of what's going on. He might even put in some markers and some preset forms. If you've already had preset forms, letting your students input it into that form, that ends up being a little more dependent. So he thought the graph paper is more dependent. That's graph paper is a little more independent because you can use it across. He wants the students to be able to use that. Here's how it impacts his grading. Take a look. Yes, these are all pseudonyms, of course, but these are the steps that he's teaching. And these are those supports, right? Place value prep for Vivian and Yurda. He's cueing Will for regrouping. He's monitoring one student for subtraction, and he gave a calculator to the other. And then the graph paper for the students who misalign. So this is what he's doing now. It's important. Take a look. This is still out of 5 steps because the student is independent in these 2, right? Ziggy can still complete the work on his own. Same with Yurda. She can still complete the work on her own. Same with Xavier. Will, he said, I'm going to cue Will and I'm going to hand a calculator to Ulysses. So I'm not going to take points off or give them points for that work since that's still on me. It's out of 4 points. This means in the future, he needs to work and he still gets full credit for the lesson, right? He still can get 100% on this, but it's also a note to Mr. Smart that he needs to work on how am I going to scaffold this away so the student becomes more independent in the future. Now take a look at how this is designed. If a student gets something wrong in this approach, let's say Xavier does not expand correctly, but all the other steps will be correct. That means his answer would be incorrect. He would end up getting 3 out of 5. Why is that powerful? Well, rather than making him do all of it again, we only have to tackle the one area. We can actually systematize, know where Xavier needs that support. If a student's getting it all correct, we can say you get it all correct and you're doing great here. Now we can start scaffolding away. If Will gets them all correct, we know where and we can start scaffolding that, right? We start teaching them based on that regrouping. This approach allows you to give specific feedback to students based on what they need. It also allows you to focus on a pro positive. So instead of just focusing on where they're getting it wrong, you get to focus on, let's say Vivian here instead doesn't regroup correctly. We can still focus on what Vivian did correct and then say the answer is really only 1 step away. So this kind of feedback is helpful. And this is what's going to help us provide more on the differentiation side for the future. All right, take a look at Xavier, right? Like we did. You see how the 5 points line up for Xavier, for Vivian, and then why Will is 4 points. So again, take a look at this. Think about how we can use this approach for our classes. And now it's your turn. Choose from one of these math topics: single digit addition, multi-digit multiplication, long division, surface area, and synthetic division. Complete a task analysis of it. Match that task analysis to that student needs chart and see what do your students currently need that they would need to support your instruction in that area. And then consider what that differentiation would be, right? What they would need and how you're going to support them in it. And then how would you assess them in that same chart? So this is your charge.